to watch. So, it's about 55 minutes long, so hopefully I'm going to talk to you for about 20 minutes, 25, then we'll start the video. If you have somewhere else to be, you can go ahead and head out before the video starts and watch it later. Yes, it will be covered on the exam. It is actually a very important video. And if something should happen where we don't get through the full video, you need to finish watching the last 5 or 10 minutes, whatever it is we don't get through later. All right, this is a very important video, lots of really important information in it for you. Okay, so anyway. So I'm gonna go ahead and start and talk a little bit about modern human origins. How do we get from archaic Homo sapiens to anatomically modern Homo sapiens? Clear morphological transition, right? Change, and there are also behavioral shifts that we recognize. So let's look at this. All right, it's not obeying. There we go. All right. So first we're going to look at quickly geographic distribution of anatomically modern humans, early anatomical modern humans. So we're talking about basically anatomically modern humans prior to about 10,000 years ago. 10,000 years to the present is really considered sort of pre-modern, modern times. And before that is a period that would be covered by paleoanthropology. We're going to look at the fossil evidence or the skeletal evidence. A lot of the remains are actually not fully fossilized, that's why we're able to get DNA. Cultural evolution, technology, art, and symbolism. Probably going to talk about that fairly quickly. So it's covered in the movie, and it's also covered in your textbook. And then we're going to look at the 3 major models for how modern humans originated, the evolutionary process. One of them is out of Africa, multi-regional continuity, and the assimilation model, right? So now we're first going to talk about the geographic distribution of fossil evidence for anatomically modern humans. And who wants to take a guess about where we find the first fossils of anatomically modern humans? Humans that look very much like you or I in terms of craniofacial and postcranial morphology. The continent. We'll start with the continent. What? Africa. Very good. Very good. Anybody want to take a wild guess? What part of Africa do we have evidence from? The earliest evidence? East Africa, yeah. And we're actually going right back to some of the same sites we've been to before. So we have from Herto, this is from East Africa, at 160,000 years ago. 160,000 years ago, the remains of a man, and this is an artist's reconstruction of what this man probably looks like. Cranial morphology, very similar to you or I. Distinctly different from what we see in the late archaic Homo sapiens, whatever you call them, Homo neanderthalensis or late archaic Homo sapiens like I do. And this individual had a cranial capacity of 1450 cc's or cubic centimeters, which puts them firmly in the modern human range. Smaller than what we see in a lot of Neanderthals, right? Neanderthals have an average upwards of 1,400, with individuals' cranial capacities up to 1,700 cc's. So larger cranial capacities in many Neanderthals. That may be because most Neanderthal specimens, fossils that have been found, seem to be males. And males have larger bodies, and heads are scaled to bodies, right? Maybe if they're more Neanderthal female skeletons that have been found, that average would come down some. But as we know right now, they had large cranial capacities. So Herto is the earliest fossil evidence at 160,000 years ago. Genetic evidence suggests that the speciation event that produces anatomically modern humans happened probably around somewhere 200,000 to 150,000. So it was probably closer to 200,000 since we have fossil evidence by 160,000. What we've seen is fossil evidence usually lags a little bit behind genetic divergence. Right, so here we have a comparison. On the far left, we have Cobway. Remember, this was early archaic Homo sapiens from East Africa at about 300,000 years ago. Right, this is definitely within the modern human range for cranial capacity, but you can see those big brow ridges. The lower vault, right, it's taller and more rounded than Homo erectus, but not nearly as tall and rounded as we see in Herto on the far right, our anatomically modern human from 160,000 years ago. And in the middle, we have a classic Neanderthal, Shanidar, which is from Shanidar Cave in Iraq. It dates to 35 to 45,000 years ago. So what this means is that we have anatomically modern humans evolving. We have a speciation event probably in Africa that gives rise to these anatomically modern humans, while Neanderthals are still living across the landscape. Probably lots of different archaic Homo sapien forms in Africa, in the Middle East, in Europe, and Asia. Right? So we've got this event that happens producing anatomically modern humans, but you can also see the morphological variation moving forward. Note Shanidar here, right? No forward projecting chin or anteriorly projecting chin. And that is one of the features, distinct features, in addition to all the others that we see, is that anteriorly projecting chin on the mandible in anatomically modern humans that we don't see in any of the archaic Homo sapiens. Geographic distribution, as we discussed, East Africa is where we have some of the earliest evidence. Herto in Ethiopia, Omo in Kenya, and then Buri and Aduma also in Ethiopia. We also have fairly early evidence from about 100,000 years ago at Clay's river mouth, the cave site in South Africa. Next, we have evidence in what area we call the Levant, or often the Middle East, sites from Israel and Jordan. Then we have sites from Australia. So by 60,000 years ago, we have anatomically modern humans in Australia. And yes, that would have required the use of some sort of boat-like vessel. They did not walk to the Australian continent. They would have had to have some kind of vessel that allowed them to traverse water. Which I mean that's pretty bold if you think about it, to get in a boat and sail out across water not knowing what you're going to find on the other side. A couple of important sites, Lake Mungo and Cow Swamp there. Then we have Denisova, which is up in what's now Russia. And these are individuals that have genetic contribution to a lot of Asian groups today. There's genetic markers that can be tracked. We also have evidence of anatomically modern humans in East Asia. Jakutian, the cave site where we looked at Homo erectus, also has evidence for these early anatomically modern humans, as well as Minatagawa on the Japanese islands. And then, of course, we have a number of sites throughout Europe where we have evidence for anatomically modern humans. The fossil evidence from Africa, even earlier than Herto, we have Omo 1 and 2 at 195,000 years before present. The thing to note here is that while we have that vault that is clearly higher vault, rounded cranial capacity in the modern human range, it is not nearly as robust. The brow ridges aren't as well developed. You don't have an occipital bun. So things that clearly indicate not archaic, you don't have the full face on Omo 1 and 2. You have the partial cranial vault. However, with Herto, you have that complete face. Clayze's river mouth, the site from South Africa, dates to this particular mandible dates about 90,000 years before present, and you can clearly see that anteriorly projecting chin that is so characteristic of anatomically modern humans. The question of why is an interesting one that is yet still being debated. From the Levant, or the Middle East, we have sites such as School, which is in Israel, and Kafsa. And so School 5, from about 90,000 years ago, is anatomically modern human. That is on here on the left. You can see that anteriorly projecting chin. And Kafsa 9, which is at 100,000 years before present. And Kafsa is actually a juvenile, fairly younger individual, not fully adult. So it looks less robust, but you can see the high vaulted cranium, the lack of robusticity, the smaller dentition, and the anteriorly projecting chin. We have evidence from Europe. We have Cro-Magnon from France, Dolny Basuni, 35,000, 26,000 years before present. And, you know, I could put the Dolny cranium up against any anatomically modern human from an archaeological context, and you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Very, very modern in the morphological appearance. So what we get is by 165,000 years ago, or probably even earlier, we have anatomically modern humans morphologically. They look like anatomically modern humans like you or I. Right? They have reduced robusticity relative to the archaics. And we see that as an ongoing pattern from Homo erectus to the archaics, the early archaics, the late archaics, and then into anatomically modern humans. A reduction in robusticity. It's probably tied to, one, an increase in the sophistication of technology to some degree. But there has to be something else going on as well, because the earliest anatomical modern humans, or the first 60 to 100,000 years, are using the same tool technology that the late archaic Homo sapiens were using. So there isn't a major technological shift until about 100,000 years ago, when anatomically modern humans, looking very much like you and I, have been wandering around all over the old world, at least, for quite a while. So smaller brow ridges, smaller nuchal ridges. Cranial capacity is not greater than what we see in late archaic Homo sapiens. Actually, Neanderthals, on average, have greater cranial capacity or larger brains than anatomically modern humans. Okay. But the vault itself in anatomically modern humans is higher, more rounded, with less robusticity. There's less of that nasal, mid-facial prognostism or forward projection of the mid-face region. And a lot of that in the late archaic Homo sapiens or Neanderthals, probably cold adaptation, because they lived in glacial Europe. But they also found in warmer climates like what's now the Middle East. You still get that mid-face projection. And obviously, as I said, a projecting chin, another hallmark of anatomically modern humans. Comparison of a Neanderthal and an anatomically modern human from sites very close together. So we have CASA 9 shown here on the right that I've already showed you, anatomically modern human from Israel, and Amud from Jordan. But notice Amud is actually 41,000 years before present. So this means anatomically modern humans have been living in this area for over 50,000 years, and we still have Neanderthals living in this region as well. Right? And Amud has classic Neanderthal features, that more sloping forehead, right? More sloping forehead, sort of a little bit of a bun, not too big occipital bun, that mid-facial prognostism, large brow ridges, retromolar space, which is sort of one of those esoteric features you see talked about for Neanderthals. Whereas in this anatomically modern humans, you have this really high globular vault, very rounded posteriorly, don't have that mid-facial prognostism, and you've got that anteriorly projecting chin. This sort of hints at it, but it is not a true anteriorly projecting chin. Right? Postcranially, anatomically modern humans have more linear body forms, narrower torsos, right, and longer arms and legs relative to the torso. So this is mostly due to longer distal limb segments, so longer forearms, radius and ulna, longer leg, tibia, fibula, and that creates a more linear body form. This is likely a more energetically efficient body form, a more energetically efficient body form. This more linear body form needs a little less energy to go out and do the things it needs to do, hunting. And we're talking probably about hunting that involves things like running or stalking, long distance walking. You shoot, or no, you don't have bow and arrows, I'm sorry. You throw a spear at an animal, you wound it, and then you walk it until it's dead. And then you've got a meal, right? So having an energetically efficient body form was probably beneficial. And one of the adaptations that is a hallmark of these anatomically modern humans. Much more energetically efficient than this big, robust, barrel-shaped, stocky body forms that Neanderthals had. And remember, Neanderthals are almost 100% carnivorous. They're eating very little vegetable matter, almost all animal protein, so very intensely animal protein diet. This more energetically efficient body form allows for a more generalized diet. And what we see time and time again through evolutionary history, and this is true for humans as well as some other species, but generalization, being flexible, being able to change adaptations fairly easily because of that flexibility, that seems to be a smart adaptation strategy. And not smart in like a cognitive way, it's one that works. What works through evolutionary history? Flexibility and the ability to adapt and change with environmental shifts, because that's primarily what marks changes in the lifespans of species. Species go extinct when environmental shifts happen and they cannot adapt. So flexibility is a big key. We see this time and time again with the Australopithecines. Who gives rise to Homo? Those smaller bodied, more generalized, flexible Australopithecines like Australopithecus garhi, which probably arose from Australopithecus afarensis. And then when we get out here, once again, we've got Neanderthals, sort of more specialized with diet and activity. We got a more generalized form, anatomically modern humans. Who is left today? Anatomically modern humans. Although many of us, if you have ancestry from an area, geographic region outside of Africa, chances are you carry Neanderthal DNA, anywhere from 1% to 4%, with the highest frequencies being in Europe, right? So here's a comparison of those two body forms. You can see that really stocky body form, bigger bones, denser bones in Neanderthals would have required higher energy input to maintain, particularly living in a glacial environment and with a heavy emphasis on animal protein. Whereas that more linear body form in anatomically modern humans, probably accompanied with a more generalized diet, would be more energy efficient and more successful. All right, so we have also a shift in technology. The earliest anatomically modern humans, Herto, Homo, stuff early on, it all looks just like what the Neanderthals were using, right? So they're using the same tool technology. At about 100,000 years ago, we start to see clear change in stone tool technology, right? So some really nice bifacial points from South Africa from about 100,000 years ago. And then even fancier tools, Solutrean tools from about 21,000 years ago in France. We have also a greater diversity of tools. Instead of just stone, we have evidence for the use of bone awls to drill holes from South Africa, harpoons, right, from antler about 15,000 years ago. In France and in other areas, we see evidence for the incorporation of the atlatl tool. And not only were these anatomically modern humans, but 17,000 years ago, making this spear thrower, that's what an atlatl is, but they were also decorating them, right? And then we have the classic art from the Upper Paleolithic, like from Chauvet Cave at 30,000 years ago, where apparently lions and rhinos and all sorts of big animals roamed the landscape, because they're depicted here. From 16,000 years ago, let's go, we have horses, aurochs, or the sort of pre-modern cattle, horse, deer, all sorts of different animals depicted. We also have evidence for symbolism, storytelling, like you get in the image on the left. Is this a hunting scene where the poor guy gets taken out by, it's essentially a buffalo? Or is this a story being told? Is it a symbolic event? And then we also have stuff like the half human, half animal figures, which means creating, right? Making things up. So there's clearly a shift in cognitive function. We've gone from, eagle talons, shells, they can be strung for personal adornment, to symbolic representation of ideas, drawing things that we don't see in the cave, right? The lions and rhinos are not in the cave, but are being represented, and stories are potentially being told. This is an indication of symbolic thought, which is associated with anatomically modern humans. We have figurines. We have the Venus figurines. They're some of the earliest types. And these often represent probably fertility. Females with no faces, but very voluptuous figures, large breasts, large bodies, individuals that would have, and it makes sense that they would have represented fertility. The Venus on the right, no, that's the closest that they ever come to actually having a face. There's no actual facial features except the hint of the eyes and the nose, and that's as close as it gets. So they're clearly symbolic, not representing specific individuals. Right? Now we have three major models of modern human origins. We have out of Africa, also known as the replacement model. This postulates that there's a speciation event in Africa that produces anatomically modern humans, and that there's absolutely no with a capital N, capital O, no interbreeding with archaic forms whatsoever. This means no breeding with Neanderthals, no breeding with Denisovians, no breeding with any archaic Homo sapiens that anatomically modern humans would have encountered. Right? So we have a single speciation event in Africa produces anatomically modern humans at about 200,000 years ago. They spread throughout the world and do not interbreed with the Neanderthals, the Denisovians, anybody that they run into. Not one bit. And then they replace those species. They are anatomically modern humans are more reproductively successful, probably because of that more energetically efficient body plan. Then you add on a new layer of cognitive function, more sophisticated toolkit, more diverse toolkit, so on and so forth. They replace, right? There's also an older theory that is currently now really falling out of favor, and this is multi-regional continuity. And this is where Homo erectus migrates out of Africa, which is where we have the initial speciation event. And in situ, so in place, we get evolution from Homo erectus to archaic Homo sapiens to anatomically modern humans. The idea is that you get the migration of Homo erectus into Asia, and in Asia you get speciation, evolution into archaic Homo sapiens and into anatomically modern humans. And again, for all the geographic regions of the world. Technically, it would take a very low amount, a very small amount of gene flow across all the geographic regions in order to maintain a single species. But this is not very well accepted today. Most of the evidence does not support this. So evidence for the models for out of Africa, the earliest fossils come from Africa, and archaeology, the earliest site and the earliest evidence for sophisticated technology comes out of Africa. So that supports the out of Africa model. Also, the genetic evidence does indicate that Eve, or the first anatomically modern humans using genetic models to go back, there was a woman who lived in a group in East Africa at about 200,000 years ago, that she and her sisters are essentially ancestors to us all. That sort of supports that out of Africa, that speciation event in Africa. The multi-regional model is supported by continuity of some traits. We see some dental morphology or shapes in teeth in Homo erectus. that has continued into anatomically modern humans in Asia. We see similar things in other parts of the world. And then we have those overlapping occupation zones and sites, like the Levant, like Asia, East Asia that we've talked about, right? Now, the genetic evidence, most recently, some of the best evidence comes from Max Planck Institute in Germany, and they managed to sequence nuclear DNA from Neanderthals in a large modern human sample. And they found that modern humans outside of Africa, ancestry outside of Africa, have 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA. They also found Denisovian genetic contributions to modern peoples in Melanesia and China. What they also find is that people who have 100% African ancestry, so ancestry from no other continent, do not have Neanderthal or Denisovian DNA. Right? So this is consistent with the third model, the assimilation model. And the assimilation model is my favorite model. It has looked since I was in grad school. This was my favorite model. It's sort of like the straddling the fence model. And I find that the ones that are kind of in between the extremes oftentimes are the most reasonable and oftentimes prove themselves out. Here it suggests we had a speciation event in Africa about 200,000 years ago, right? After early archaic Homo sapiens had spread out throughout the world and evolved into late archaic Homo sapiens, right? Modern Homo sapiens move out of Africa. They migrate across the African continent from East Africa and into the rest of the old world. So Europe, Asia, and Australasia. They interbreed with the archaic groups, essentially assimilate those archaic groups with them. And this has always been my takeaway, and the reason why I kind of thought this made sense was that we're talking about humans, right? Right? And when humans can, humans do. This is true, right? So you've got anatomically modern humans moving up out of Africa through the Arabian Peninsula into the Levant, and they encounter Neanderthals. Now, Neanderthals don't look exactly like anatomically modern humans, but they're pretty similar, right? Humans can, they will. They're going to pass up an opportunity for a little nookie-nookie? No. Right? It's just how it works. So things can keep interbreeding from occurring, like lack of language, shared language, things of that nature. But if you're living in caves not very far away from each other, chances are over time you'll build up relationships. And then this is supported by the fact that there is Neanderthal DNA, Denisovian DNA, and as we'll also find out, other archaic group DNA in our DNA as modern. So anatomically modern humans have greater reproductive success. So even though they interbreed with the archaic groups, they essentially swamp them out for the most part, which ends up looking like replacement in the fossil record. So this assimilation model incorporates the archaeological evidence, speciation event, origin in Africa, migration across Europe, Asia, and into Australasia, and then the genetic contributions from archaic groups in anatomically modern humans, us, right? Explains all of this. So this takes us to the video, and again, because I overshot, as I always do, you'll want to watch the last of this movie. And I forgot to tell you guys to get on Canvas. So here in the first few minutes while we're getting the movie up, go ahead, go to Canvas. There is